you've ever been really caught up in a painful state of mind, stress, worry, fear, anger, especially anger, you may notice that there is this quality in the mind that is a lens, a kind of a cloud or a filter over what you're experiencing and what you're seeing in the situation, which has this very powerful polarizing effect. It's an all or nothing kind of way of thinking, a black and white kind of thinking, either or. It's thinking in absolutes that usually results in a lot of mental anguish, especially in an emotionally charged situation. The capacity of the mind to perceive the nuance, to perceive the gradations in the situation is almost totally eradicated in that state of mind, and you're seeing in absolutes, good and evil. Usually they're evil and I am good, black and white, right and wrong, either this or that, when in fact there might be an alternative way, but your mind in that moment is so deluded, is so gripped that it can only see these two options, and you are put literally between a rock and a hard place. And it's in this place where my favorite card, Temperance, really begins to shine, where Temperance has a lot to teach us, right? Because if you study this card, if you look closely at what's happening, we have the angel, and the angel is blending water and wine. And these are two principles that are being integrated, blended together, right? The wine could be understood as fire, and the water, of course, is water. So we have these two opposing things that are somehow being reconciled, that are being integrated in a non-oppositional way. They're in a very blissful way. If you can see by the composition of this image, by the feeling that you get from this card, right? It's a very peaceful state of conscious, right? So we have something non-dual happening, where we might say something transcendent, something angelic in us is able to take a third way, is able to look at a situation in a non-oppositional way, in a non-conflicting way, but instead is able to see far more nuance, see a holistic picture, a non-dual, integrative, unitive picture that allows for the whole spectrum of experience to exist without resistance. So the Temperance card is, in fact, in my opinion, referring to a state of consciousness, right? And when this card is arriving in a reading, it's often pointing to the fact that we are, in fact, being gripped by a very dualistic way of thinking. We are seeing things in absolutes. We are gripped in an all or nothing mindset, a black and white mindset, good and evil. And in that way of thinking, the stakes are so high, we think, that suffering is inevitable. But Temperance, in fact, points to the truth that there is a different state of consciousness available to us at any time, at any moment, which we can access. It's a state of consciousness that is able to see things in a more holistic way. It's a state of consciousness that's able to reconcile the contradictions in a situation, or otherwise hold the contradictions in a situation without being caught up in a kind of tribalistic, all or nothing, life or death crazy making state of mind. This, on the other hand, is a more transcendent state of consciousness. You might call it the witnessing consciousness. But there is more to it, I think, than that even. Because the angel, of course, is an emissary of God. The angel is the active principle of the divine, the mediating principle of the divine that is active in any given situation, right? So it is the help that we have. And for me, it often, when this card comes, it's reminding me, A, that I'm locked in very dualistic thinking, and that there is another state of consciousness available to me, a higher state of consciousness, a more unitive way of seeing that will allow me to hold these oppositions, will allow me to hold the conflict, the binaries, the extremes of the situation in a bigger frame, in a holistic frame, in a much vaster state of mind. And in fact, we can ask for that, right? We can request from the divine. We can say a prayer, you might say, for our thinking to be shifted so that we are situated in this angelic consciousness. And then what happens is interesting, because the temperance card, of course, speaks about self-control usually, and moderation. And of course, when we are caught in a very extreme state of mind, anger, frustration, envy, any of the ugly, deluded states of the soul, moderation is definitely not something that is possible. It would normally require a massive, heroic amount of willpower to control yourself, whether that is from lashing out in a destructive way or self-medicating in a destructive way, literally drinking yourself into a stupor to escape, or doing any of the things that the temperance card in a more conventional sense would be referring to as needing moderation, needing self-control. When we are able to call upon this angelic consciousness, this help we have, that is available to us, that the divine makes available to us, whether that is through prayer, through meditation, and we find our state of consciousness shifting or elevating in such a way that we are seeing things in a more unitive way, from that somewhat more transcendent state, self-control, moderation, being able to moderate your impulses, whether that is to not lash out in an angry way, not drink too much to help with the pain of the situation, or any other self-medication, things that we do to medicate ourselves, anything of that sort. Instead of needing to do that by an act of sheer willpower, which is usually not possible when you're in that much pain, when you're shifted into that more transcendent state, that self-moderation is spontaneous. Things spontaneously fall under the control of that state of consciousness. Things are spontaneously integrated, right? The opposites in the situation, the water and the wine, become spontaneously blended, and there is a sense of unity that begins to emerge in what would otherwise be an absolutist picture of the situation, a situation in which you could only see black and white. You begin seeing gradations, you begin seeing other possibilities. You might think, oh, I can only go or stay, those are my options. And it turns out that there might be 10 other options that you weren't allowing yourself to see from that fixated place, from the place of the deluded impulse, the deluded self. And then when that more angelic consciousness begins to emerge, that integrative vision, that unitive state is naturally something that allows us to moderate the situation. We find self-control spontaneously arriving. We find the need to self-medicate just vanishing, right? I wanted to point out the connection to that state of consciousness that the Temperance card has. And that when this arrives in a reading, when you see the Temperance card, you might want to check firstly where you are stuck in black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, us and them, tribalistic thinking, where there is a win-lose attitude, anything like that. When that creeps into your mind, invariably along with that, there will be suffering, there will be pain, there will be worry, there will be anxiety. And of course, we can see that in the world today. Social media is more or less constructed to perpetuate this kind of non-nuanced, all or nothing, black and white thinking. And so when this card arrives, you can ask yourself, well, where am I being caught in that? And then you might also see it as an invitation to shift to a more unitive vision, a more angelic consciousness. And that you can access by asking. Believe it or not, you can actually ask. You can pray for that, and it will happen. It just kind of is. There will be some grace that will help your mind shift if the prayer is sincere. I've seen this in my own experience, and it's a very easy, simple thing to do, is to say a prayer that your consciousness might be shifted out of this black and white thinking to a more angelic, unitive state, a more divine way of looking at things, you could say. And then, of course, failing that, or if you just don't like praying, meditation, yoga, something like that, an intervention, a mechanical intervention that will interrupt that binary, dualistic state of mind, so that there can be an integration. And from that integration, then from that harmonious reconciling of the opposites in the situation, which is reality, that is what is really going on. Your mind is tricking you into thinking in black and white terms. Reality isn't like that. Reality is a continuity, a spectrum. But shifting out of that, therefore, brings some sense of freedom, it brings some sense of peace.